Hi, my name is Staff Sergeant Jonathan Sanchez. I'm currently assigned to the 306th Operations Support Squadron at the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, Colorado. As part of an initiative to further educate future airfield managers, this guide should provide a little perspective when conducting an airfield inspection. In this four-part video, I will go over what to look for when conducting airfield inspections in regards to techniques when conducting an airfield inspection, airfield signs, airfield markings, and pavement failures. Now, let's get started. Airfield inspection techniques. All personnel performing an airfield inspection must have an operational understanding. When you begin to conduct airfield inspections, you want to ensure that your inspection patterns vary. The main reason for this approach is to prevent complacency when you are conducting an airfield inspection. Speaking from experience, it can become easy to get stuck in your ways and fall into a trap of taking the same route or routine every day while conducting an airfield inspection. That sort of complacency can make it easy to potentially miss discrepancies that lead to hazardous conditions. Over time, everyone will develop their own niche when conducting their inspection. As long as you have an operational understanding, along with situational awareness and attention to detail, you will be able to effectively conduct airfield inspections. Now, onto the components of the items you will be inspecting. During an airfield inspection, one of the components of an airfield inspection is analyzing airfield signs. There are three different categories of signs on your airfield: location signs, directional signs, and mandatory signs. Your location sign will have a black background with yellow letters, borders, and/or numbers. Your directional or guidance signs will have a yellow background with black letters and/or numbers. And last, a mandatory sign will have a red background with white lettering or numbering. A sign can have multiple messages or information, and in that instance they will be co-located together. For instance, a location sign could be co-located with a mandatory sign, but this isn't the case for all signs. Directional or guidance signs cannot be co-located with mandatory signs, as location signs can. Depending on the FAA size of the sign, that is what determines how far the sign can be from the defined edge of the runway or taxiway. For instance, if a mandatory sign is FAA size 3, then it should be located 35 to a maximum of 60 feet from either defined pavement aforementioned. FAA size 2 would be 20 to a maximum of 35 feet away from either defined pavement, and FAA size 1 would be 10 to a maximum of 20 feet away. For directional or guidance signs, you want to ensure those signs are located on the left side of a taxiway unless operations require otherwise. The sizes of these signs can also be FAA size 1, 2, or 3. Depending on the FAA size at your airfield will determine the distance a directional or guidance sign will be from the defined pavement, runway, or taxiway. The same applies to location signs regarding being placed on the left side of a taxiway, but can be deviated if being on the right side makes for better visibility. When it comes to mandatory signs, one of the things you want to ensure is that there are signs on both sides of the runway if the runway is more than 150 feet wide, as well as taxiways with a width of 150 feet or more. As you see in this picture, 2 signs are not required due to the taxiway width being less than 150 feet. Other signs you may have at your airfield are runway distance markers, arresting gear markers, as well as your typical traffic signs for vehicle traffic on your airfield. When inspecting the runway distance markers, they will be located parallel to the runway and should be 50 to 75 feet from the runway edge. They are placed in 1,000-foot increments. For military airfields, their FAA size dimension will be a size 4, which is a panel height of 48 inches. If your airfield is equipped with an arresting gear system, usually at fighter aircraft bases, then your runway will have arresting gear markers. These will be yellow moonlight figures on a black background, which indicate where on the runway the arresting gear system exactly is. When inspecting these markings, you want to ensure they are 50 to 75 feet from the runway edge, similar to the runway distant marker. Their dimension is also size 4. On the surface, some of the more basic things to look for when inspecting airfield signs are making sure the background and legend colors are correct, making sure the letters and/or numbers are legible and easy to read, ensuring the sign is not obscured by anything from dirt or snow to vegetation, ensuring that the sign is frangible, and of course, making sure the sign is illuminated if your airfield conducts nighttime flying operations. For more in-depth information regarding these signs, you can access the UFC 3-535-01. In there will be all the different FAA sizes in regards to the panel dimensions these signs are allowed to be. Now, let's discuss airfield markings and some of the things to look for during an airfield inspection. In this segment of the video, we will go into the sizes and colors of airfield markings, giving you additional things outside of the basics to look for on your inspection. Let's start with runway markings, including runway center lines, runway threshold markings, and runway side stripes. To begin, runway centerline markings are retroreflective white. Ensure runway centerlines are uniformly spaced 80 feet apart. If your runway is a non-precision or precision instrument approach, making sure the centerline stripes are 3 feet wide. Here at the United States Air Force Academy, due to its Class A status, our centerline stripes are 1.5 feet wide. Also, your runway centerline should begin 40 foot inward from the runway designator. Runway threshold markings are also retroreflective white. Threshold markings identify the beginning of the full-strength pavement. These markings are the group of longitudinal stripes at the start of the runway. They span 200 feet across the runway, and you want to ensure the threshold markings begin 20 feet inward of the full-strength pavement. Again, due to United States Air Force Academy's Class A status, runway threshold markings do not exist at this location. This brings us to the runway designation marker. These markings are retroreflective white as well. Ensure their dimension size is correct, as they should be 5 foot wide on the vertical stripes and 10 foot wide on horizontal stripes. Ensure the spacing of the designation numbers are 10 feet unless your designators are 10 and 11. In that case, they will be 7.5 feet apart. You also want to make sure if your designator is a single digit, that a 0 precedes that single digit. Now, moving on to the runway side stripes. This is the continuous stripe on each side of the runway. Ensure if the runway at your location is more than 100 feet wide, that these stripes measure a minimum of 3 feet, and if less than 100 feet wide, at least 1.5 feet in width. You also want to make sure the runway side stripes begin 20 feet inward of the runway threshold, as well as continues to 20 feet on the opposite end. Now, let's dive into taxiway markings and what you want to look for during an airfield inspection. Taxiway centerline stripes and taxi lane centerline stripes. Of course, you want to make sure these stripes are retroreflective yellow if that is a requirement at your location. At Class A airfields, retroreflective markings are not a requirement. You want to make sure these stripes are 6 inches wide, but can optionally be increased to 12 inches when it is necessary. At your location, you may come across interruption with the taxiway markings. For example, taxiway centerlines across the runway are interrupted by the runway designator or threshold markings. Ensure the taxiway centerline across a runway interrupts the marking 5 feet on either side of the threshold markings and runway designators. Also, taxiway lead-in lines extend 200 feet onto the runway. Moving on to taxiway edge stripes, the same applies to color and retroreflectivity. The edge stripes will also be 6 inches wide and will have a 6-inch gap between the two continuous stripes. Moving on to VFR hold lines and what you're looking for during an inspection. The VFR hold line should be located 100 to 250 feet from the near edge of the runway, with 100 feet being the minimum setback. The same colors apply to VFR hold line markings as previously mentioned taxiway markings. That is retroreflective yellow. When inspecting the size of VFR hold line markings, you want to ensure the two solid lines as well as dashed lines are 6 or 12 inches wide. Marked on the taxiway edge to edge. Moving on to apron markings, like taxiway markings are retroreflective yellow. Apron edge stripes are two continuous 6-inch stripes separated by a 6-inch gap and are used to delineate the usable limits of the taxiway or apron from other pavements not intended for routine use by aircraft. Other apron markings such as apron taxi center lines are 6 inches wide and solid yellow. Other things to ensure is your airfield markings are not peeling, chipping or fading, ensuring retroreflectivity of markers unless at a Class A airfield where that is not a requirement, and making sure a rubber buildup is not an obscurity to the particular airfield marking. In this segment of the video, we went over runway, taxiway, and apron markings in regards to dimensions, locations, and color. For more information on airfield markings, access the UFC 3-260-04. Moving on to the next segment of the video, we will be discussing the pavement areas on an airfield and what discrepancies you are paying attention to, as well as tracking when you make those identifications during an airfield inspection. Keep in mind, when inspecting the pavement areas, you're ensuring that you're maintaining standards that will not potentially impair safe aircraft operations. For instance, when looking at a flexible pavement such as asphalt, you want to pay attention to cracking as well as ruts in the wheel pads. On flexible pavement, this is normally evidence of a deteriorating pavement and should be something that is monitored. Cracked pavement is also evidence of potential pavement failures. These are the type of pavement discrepancies that should be tracked and monitored for potential hazards and further deterioration. While conducting your airfield inspection, keep an eye on high aircraft traffic areas and the first 3,000 feet of runway ends. The intention is to identify pavement distresses or discrepancies before they become potential hazards to your flying operation. Overall, maintaining a keen sense of awareness on airfield pavement could potentially save lives in the long term. Inspection on the pavement areas is a critical aspect to your overall airfield inspection. In summary, we discussed 4 components for conducting an airfield inspection, from airfield inspection techniques in regards to ensuring your daily inspection patterns vary to avoid complacency, to airfield signs in regards to the different FAA class sizes and how they pertain to your sign placement, as well as the 3 different categories of airfield signs, to airfield markings discussing different runway, apron, and taxiway markings, and finally, airfield pavement areas and examples of potential pavement failures.